What is happening, everybody? It is the start of another NBA season. And as you probably have come to expect, we've got some really cool new tools here over at Stokastic.com built around simulations. And because I thought Steve did such a good job explaining how all of our NFL tools work, we're bringing them back in for NBA. We're going to go over the whole process of all of the NBA tools we have this year. It's going over the contest generator, going over the contest sims, and then also our late swap tool. A lot of people have been wondering, how are you going to be able to late swap with all the tools that we have over at Stokastic.com? We're going to answer that in the course of this tutorial video. So any questions you guys have should be answered over the course of the video. Steve, how's it going? And you looking forward to the start of NBA season here?
Yeah, absolutely. Super pumped up for the NBA season. I mean, there's just like so many good players in NBA right now. DFS season is going to be great. Looking forward to hopefully the Nuggets repeating, though. So hopefully we get after that.
Yeah, and we do have the Denver Nuggets also playing on opening night, which is for just the purpose of this tutorial here. Steve and I are going to be building lineups built around that opening day 2-game slate. We'll be walking through all the features here in the contest generator and the Sims tool. So going to start off here by building lineups out for FanDuel. We do have FanDuel, DraftKings, and Owner's Box supported in here. We're going to have main slates. We're also going to have the alternate slates like the late slates, and then also for DraftKings supporting stuff like the showdown slates. But for this, building lineups for the main slate, and we have options to build 250, 500, 1,000, 2,000, or 5,000 lineups. If you guys have the base package, you can build up to 500 lineups here. If you have the max package, up to 5,000. So, Steve, before we start here, what should people be selecting? If it's single entry or large field, when would they be using 2,000 versus 5,000, the different size of the pool selections?
Yeah, so in general, your main goal here is to make a contest similar to the contest that you are playing. So for instance, if you only play really small contests, then maybe the 250 or the 500 contest is the right size for you. But in general, any of the bigger contests, the ones that have 100K to first or anything like that, I would tend towards the larger size of the 5,000-ish range. And actually, even if you're playing on some of the smaller ones, I don't actually even hate building more lineups just to give yourself a chance to analyze a little bit more lineups anyways. And just in that case, maybe moving, when we go to the pre-contest simulator, moving the percent of first down a little bit since you're going to have a different one. So in general, I think go for that larger size, but you can potentially use some smaller ones if you have really small contests that you're using.
All right, so we'll select 5,000 here, and then we're going to generate the lineups. And now, Steve, when the contest generator is building these 5,000 lineups for us, what is it actually doing in this process?
Yeah, so it's building, like we said, a whole bunch of lineups, 5,000 in this case, and you can see how fast it is. It's just like super fast in how it's building those lineups. It's trying to do a job of replicating what we think the contest is actually going to look like. So it's not building the 5,000 most optimal lineups based on projection. It's not building 5,000 lineups with projection in mind, with randomness, anything like that. It's just trying to replicate what we think the field is going to look like. And that includes a lot of really good lineups and maybe some that aren't quite as good as well. But it's going to help us to figure out how we best want to attack that type of contest, essentially.
Yeah, and we've got a few different columns here. Ownership. So that is going to be the projected ownership of the player, the pool exposure. That's the amount of each player that we have in the set of lineups built, and the difference between the two. And then we've got the boost ownership arrows here, where for up, that would increase the ownership of a player, down to decrease the ownership. But Steve, when is somebody actually supposed to be using these different arrows? So in what scenario should somebody be using the up or down arrow after building out lineups in the contest generator?
Yeah, so we're trying to take into consideration everything that we know about the contest, how popular a player we think they're going to be, maybe based off of their projections around the industry, based on how they've been playing recently, etc. But if you have some additional ideas that you think that we're not taking into consideration fully, maybe the coach said something in practice that you thought that maybe we're not thinking about, or he said something after the last game that you think might be influencing people to play that player more or less. then you can just decrease their ownership. Like you think maybe Aaron Gordon in this case isn't going to be in 67% of lineups because he has been shooting really cold lately, right? And people aren't going to want to play him, and we haven't factored that in enough, in your opinion. You could just boost him down, and then he's going to come into less lineups into the contest.
Yeah, and then one thing to note is that after you press the button, for it to actually take effect, you have to regenerate the lineups afterwards. If you just press the button and then don't rebuild the lineups, that's not going to actually material impact what the exposures are of the player. So if you want to make a change, make sure to click regenerate lineups afterwards. Something else you could do is you could remove a player from the player pool entirely by clicking on them over here. So then if you were to rebuild lineups after taking them out of the player pool, they would not show up in any lineups. What's the scenario where you'd recommend somebody removing a player from the player pool?
Yeah, probably the most likely time that I would do that is if it's really close to lock and we got news quickly that Aaron Gordon wasn't going to play at all, and you just wanted to build something really quickly. Maybe you don't think like the industry has adapted really quickly, and you want to just like get him out of your lineups completely. You don't necessarily even want to worry about having a 100% accurate pool. You just want to keep him out of it. Where I wouldn't necessarily use it is if you think Aaron Gordon is a bad play. And that's one I've heard a lot of people talk about. They just want to take Aaron Gordon out because they don't want him in any of their final lineups. Remember, what this is trying to do is we're trying to figure out how we can beat lineups with Aaron Gordon. And especially if we take him out of it completely, then we wouldn't have that analysis to be able to determine if we can take how we can beat Aaron Gordon type of lineups.
A couple of timestamps on the page you guys also might find useful is that we have the last time our projection and ownership was updated. So if you're ever looking at the data and trying to figure like, hey, I got these lineups built, when was the last time projections were updated? Top right, you'll see here last updated October 23rd at 12:06 for both the ownership and the projection. So you could always look at that as a reference point. Couple of other things that you guys could do here is we have the lineups and rankers page. So you can rank your lineups based on a couple of different factors in here. What should people be doing if they are using this information? What does the projection rank, the ownership rank? What do these columns mean, Steve?
Yeah, so basically this is a pretty basic ranking process if you want to just get some lineups and rank them really quickly instead of going through the whole simulation process. And what this is doing is it's saying out of the 5,000 lineups we built, this lineup at the top is the highest projected lineup. You can see that number one there. And it is 4,910, looks like, based off of ownership rank. And then it kind of combines together to give an overall rank of 2,187. So, and that's with a 50% weight to that, basically that one, and 50% rank to that 4,910. So if you wanted to rank projection higher, you could boost that up to like 70% and then ownership down to 30%, and it will give you a new rank. And then you can kind of just quickly have a quick set of rankings on your lineups.
And then there's also a dupes column here, which you guys could sort by, which for most NBA slates is not going to be massively impactful whether your lineup is duped or not on, a slate that's really big, but it actually could come into play for a 2-game slate, like on opening night where, you are going to see a lot of overlap in lineups. So Steve, when we're looking at the dupes column, why is it that we're going to have lineups built out multiple times of the exact same lineup, building lineups in the contest generator? And how is that going to impact our simulations when we get to the next step?
Yeah, so the dupes are really important, especially on these 2-3 game slates and showdowns as well. Not so much on the bigger ones, like you said. What it's doing is it's going to essentially share the prize pools that you win. So in this case, with this lineup that is duplicated 17 times, essentially, like let's say the prize pool is 100,000 to first and 50,000 to second, etc. Then you're going to end up with not getting 100,000 anymore. If you win, you're going to get something a lot less, maybe 15,000 or something like that after it splits up all the different prize pools. So if we just graded out that lineup as being worth 100,000 to first, it is going to win more often, and we can't really let it get credit for all those. We got to give it a boost down, otherwise it's not going to be very accurate. So this is going to help us understand which of those lineups are too popular, essentially.
Yeah, and then if you guys want to also just play with lineups from the contest generator, you could export lineups right from here into a CSV, and you could rank them using, projections, ownership, however you like. So if you did want to just play lineups from here and build them, that is also something you could do by exporting them from here. Let's go ahead to the simulation page now. So if you guys have your lineups built out in the contest generator, which as you saw before, it only takes like 30 seconds to build 5,000 lineups. It works very quick. And then after that, you click on the simulate lineups button, and the files are going to be included right on this page right here, the contest generator file. If you guys want to build lineups using an external lineup building site like Fantasy Cruncher, you can, but you don't have to. You could just use the contest generator and the lineups will go right to here. Make sure you have the right site selected, the right slate that you're playing on. And then we've got some options here for percent payout to first, Steve. What should people be selecting here when you see the options 5, 10, 25, 30%? What should people select before simulating out the lineups that we just built?
Yeah, so what this is doing is it's essentially using the data from the website. So FanDuel might have a contest that has 300,000 prize pool and 100,000 to first. Essentially, you can do the math there and say 100,000 divided by 300,000 is 33% to first in that case. And then in that case, in general, what it means is you have to be a little bit more aggressive the higher the percent to first is. Just because like it's so important to get first. If you think in a really simple term, if it was just the top 50% of the lineups win, like in a cash game, you want to be super conservative and just hope for the top score. But when you get more percent to first, you have to be a lot more taking risks, and this is going to help you do that. So in that case, I would mostly choose this 30% to first. In that case, in that example that I just gave. If you have like a whole bunch of different lineups that you're using, like different contests that you're entering, maybe something more in the middle, right? Like 20% to first, because there are a whole bunch of different types of contests that you can enter. And then I would say the other option that I would say I mentioned a little bit in the beginning is if you're building for a smaller contest, but you don't want to use just 250 lineups. You want to analyze more than 250 lineups. In that case, I tend to build more lineups and then use a lower percentage to first in this case, just so that it helps pick some of those better lineups, but choosing them more with upside included.
One other way that I've sometimes used the lower percentage payouts to first is like on Owner's Box, where there's been a lot of overlay this year. That's another scenario where, the prize pool might not totally be full and there's just overlay from that standpoint. So I feel like I don't need to take as many risks to be profitable. So that's another scenario. I might select, a 10% to first. But for this demonstration, I'll select 20% to first. And then also, if you guys want to use custom projections, it defaults to using the Stokastic projections in here. But if you wanted to upload your own projections, you could select custom projections, and then you download the template, copy your projections, and put them over the existing projections. And then you're going to be able to use your own projections when you actually simulate out the contest. But here, using the lineups that we just built over here in the Stokastic projections, we're going to run the contest simulation. And Steve, what is the machine doing here as it's simulating out the slate?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're taking all of the different situations that could happen thousands and thousands of times. In some cases, Jokic might get hurt the first few minutes of the game and score very few points. Other times he may end up scoring like 80 points in the game. And what we're trying to do is just balance out all those and figuring out the actual probability of all of those happening for every player and every game on the slate. And then we are assigning those points for every lineup that you have in your contest that you have generated. So in scenario one, where Jokic only had 5 points, maybe in that same scenario, Aaron Gordon had 60, and maybe in another game, some of the other players, had whatever. And then what we'll do is we'll just grade out all of those lineups for that scenario and see which lineup won, and then assign that dollars to that lineup. Then we'll just go on and do the same thing for the second scenario. What happened on that slate? And then essentially at the end of the day, we have I don't remember, 40,000 different simulations that we have ran and played that slate. And then we'll average out all of those different results and see how good each of the lineups did during that time frame.
Yeah, and when we get to the late swap tool, late swap is also simulating out 40,000 times. So these lineups have played against each other 40,000 times. These are the results. It's going to default by sorting our lineups by simulated ROI. The other things you guys are going to see here in terms of columns is the projected fantasy points, the total ownership of the lineups, the percentage of time that lineup is expected to win, or I should say the amount of times that it won when they all played against each other, the times it came in the top 10%, the amount of times that it cashed in the contest. But Steve, we default to sort by simulated ROI. Why is that what we're sorting by as opposed to, say, something like cash percentage or just the raw fantasy projection?
Yeah, so simulated ROI is essentially taking into consideration all of those items. Essentially, a simulated ROI is the sum of all of the money that was won in all of those thousands and thousands of simulations, and just dividing it by the total number of entry fees that you would have essentially entered to play those. So over the long term, that is the best way that you can maximize your investment, essentially. So in this case, this lineup has 490% ROI. And of course, this doesn't mean you're going to get a 490% ROI. It's just with the lineups that we simulated here, this last set in the contest generator, that's what it came up with. And that is also, to our conversation earlier about dupes, this lineup is one that was duplicated 3 times. So we are splitting all of those winnings. It actually won 3 times as much as that, but they had to be divided by the 3 people that were sharing those. So that's what I almost always go by, is the simulated ROI. I have heard people say that the simulated ROI makes your portfolio a little bit more risky, which is true, because it is the lineups that are going to win you the most over the long term. However, we can't play this game necessarily 40,000 times, right? There's only 100 slates per year. So if you wanted to be a little bit more risk averse, you could mix in some ones that have higher top 10% rates or cash percents, or use lower percentages to first as well. That would also spread out your ROI to chalk your lineups.
And so after you guys have these lineups all built out, you now favorite the lineups. So there's a couple of different things you could do here. You could favorite 150, 150, 20, or a custom amount. So let's say you're playing 27 lineups, because that's what it is you want to play for the day. You could also go favorite custom amount, and you could just select something like 37, 27, whatever the number is. What I'm typically doing, if I'm playing 150 lineups, I just select top 150 lineups. Since I have it sorted by simulated ROI, it's automatically going to select the top 150 simulated ROI lineups for me. And if I wanted to right here, I could click export, and that would create a CSV file with all of these lineups, and you could just upload them directly to whichever site you're playing on, DraftKings, FanDuel, Owner's Box. You could play those lineups as is. Let's go and look at some of the other categories here, Steve. Looking at the player ROI tab, what is it that this information is telling us? We have the player's name, the team they're on, the position, and then their average simulated ROI, their fantasy point projection. So what is this the average simulated ROI of?
So what that is doing is it's essentially taking all of the lineups with a Koji in it, and it just basically is doing the math. And it says, if you had a lineup into the contest generator, he came out with an ROI of about 16.6% in all of the lineups that were created with a Koji. So he's the best play according to this simulation, and given the number of lineups that are in. It doesn't necessarily mean he has to be on your lineup the most, but it is probably one of the ones that you should be probably more leveraged on more often.
And then one thing too is if you guys are ever searching for anything in particular, you could go to the filters and you could search for an individual player. You could do stuff by looking at a team. So let's say you just were, maybe you're like Steve and you're a Denver Nuggets fan and you know how to spell the Denver abbreviation right, like I just did incorrectly. You type in DEN, and then what you're going to find here is all of the Denver players are going to be filtered individually. And you can do this on any of the any of the tabs here. If you're looking at your exposures, you could sort by players this way. Another way too, that you just find some additional information you might be looking for. But that's the simulated ROI for the individual player. And now we have the favorites column here, which is just more information on the lineups. These are the ones that we have favored, and more of the columns from the front page to the simulated ROI, the projected fantasy points, the ownership sum here. And now we have the exposures column, which is the one that means the most to us. These are the players they're rooting for and or against over the course of the NBA slate. So let's start with this, Steve. We've got the exposure column. What is our exposure column telling us?
Yeah, so this one is telling us, like you said, it has a lot of the general information like the player name, team, etc. We've got the simulated player ROI that we just talked about. So we could see again that Koji was at 16.6%. This exposure is what percentage of the lineups has that player in it. So we're saying here that we have 90% of our lineups have him in it. That's a pretty high number. And then the projected fantasy points, what their ownership is projected to be, and then that's basically what we've the same projected ownership that we've always been using historically here for the last several years, and then how much leverage we have, so how much we are over the field. So in this case, we're saying 90% is what our exposure is. That's how often he's in our lineups, compared to the ownership of 48.5. So he's the player that we're most leveraged over on the field. That's kind of consistent with what we were talking about on the player ROI tab. So you will also see that not necessarily all of the players that we have high exposures on, because this is sorted by exposure, they may not always be the highest ROI necessarily. Like Bradley Beal was a minus 15.8% ROI, but his ownership is at 28%. So it's like you could still get over leverage on him just based off of like position and the way that his lineups fit together for the ones that you actually have with him, right? So maybe people aren't going to him in the best way possible, and there's just different ways that you can get different with him and still be a good lineup for your lineup. So that's a very powerful way the Sims really helps play all of your lineups against each other and build lineups that are strategically important to play together.
And all these all these columns are sortable and very easily so. You just click on them. So if you wanted to see which players you are the most underweight to the field to, that's why some of these numbers here are negative. So for instance, Jamal Murray projected for 38.2% ownership. He's in 19.3% of our lineups. So we have a negative 19.2% leverage rating here because that's how underweight to the field we are. And then you could also do the inverse where you sort it and see which players are most positively overweight to. So you could see we're way more on a Koji than the field, way more on Steph Curry, way more on Jonathan Kuminga. And that kind of gives you an idea of which players you're going to be rooting for, which players you're going to be rooting against relative to what your exposure is against what the field has. And now, once again, you could hit this export button. You could export them. Is there anything else here, Steve, that we should be walking people through with these tabs? If not, we'll go to the ROI boost.
Yeah, that's the next one. I think it's a good one. All right.
So ROI boost, which this is the one that I think people are going to be asking us the most about, is how do they customize their own lineups, the players that they're getting exposures to? This is how you do it. You select the ROI boost, and you can do a couple of different things. Either you downgrade or upgrade players' ROIs. But what's the impact of this, Steve? What are we actually doing when we're changing the ROI of individual players like a Josh Okogie, who we have 90% exposure to?
Yeah, so what it's doing is we saw, for instance, the simulated ROI for each lineup. They were in the 490%, I think, for that first lineup. And what we're going to do here is essentially reduce the ROI for every lineup that has a Koji in it if we wanted to get him lower, or we could increase it for players that we aren't getting enough of. And what it's going to do is it's going to take just simple math. It's going to say that lineup was originally 490%. If we put, let's say, minus 50% ROI to Okogie, then it's going to move that lineup from 490% to 440%, if I can do the math here. And then that's going to happen to every lineup with him in it. And then in theory, that should reduce your exposure to him. Now, if you only put 1%, maybe it won't. But if you do enough, then it's going to reduce your exposure or increase it for other players too.
Yeah, so we'll give an example here. So Josh Okogie, we currently have a 90% of lineups. So did a negative 50% ROI boost. Next, you have to hit boost ROI for it to take effect. But then after this, you have to go back to your lineups, unfavorite them, and then reselect your top 150. So these are resorted now by the simulated ROI. But now you'll see we've got these negative 50% boosts. That's accounting for what Steve just talked about with that ROI boost. And now if we favorite the top 150 and go back to our exposures, you'll see we went from having 90% of Koji to 76% because we downgraded some of those lineups that he was in. Now it's only a 2-game slate. There's only so many options. So we still end up with a pretty good amount of them. And if you wanted to make it more dramatic, you could always go to the ROI boost and make it even more negative. And then if you ever have an ROI boost that you want to get away, you could just clear the boost. And then you'll see Okogie went back to 0. And then if you go back to the lineups page, and if you unfavorite them, and then you favorite them again, and then you go back to here, you'll see back to original lineups, 90% Josh Okogie. So if you guys want to manipulate and change the ownership exposure you're getting of individual players, you go and you do the exposures in here, and then you do the ownership in the contest generator if you wanted to change that. So just so we make it clear to people, because I do think this is something, Steve, that you and I both see a lot of questions about. What is the difference between us doing the ROI boost versus us doing the ownership boost or downgrade in the contest generator?
Yeah, very good question. So ROI boost is more akin to, if you think about old way of playing DFS, an ROI boost is like similar to raising up someone's projection, or raising it down, right? So that is like the way you would have adjusted previously. Whereas the contest generator is more akin to adjusting somebody's ownership projection previously. So if you think they kind of work the opposite ways, if you are boosting somebody's ROI or projection, that is going to typically get that player into your lineup more often. If you are boosting somebody up in contest generator, it's actually going to get you that player a little bit less often because now they're in more lineups. They have a higher ownership. And then in that case, you're trying to find ways to fade that player essentially. So of course, if you boosted him in contest generator all the way to 100%, then you're going to get all of them, but at the extremes. But in general, that's going to be the way that they're going to work.
All right. So next thing, and this is really what I'm most excited about that we're going to talk about next. Not that I'm not excited about all of it, but I've been wondering for a long time that ever since we started coming out with Sims tools, dating all the way back to baseball, I was wondering when NBA comes around, what are we going to do for late swap? Because we all know that late swap is such a big part of NBA, and we have a late swap tool now over on the site. So just like a high level overview, how does the late swap tool work, and when are people going to be using it for basketball?
Yeah, so in the NBA, the main time you should be swapping is anytime that there are major news items, whether that's a player being ruled out, a player that's being ruled in. We get some news that a player is going to be on a minutes limit, something like that. All those things are happening all the time. We get news that what the starting lineup is going to be about 30 minutes before each game locks, which means we don't have that news at the time of lock. So what we want to do is take advantage of all of that new information that we've got throughout the night. And what this is going to do is it's going to take in the newest projections that we have available. You can, again, use your own custom projections in this case as well. But then it's going to essentially evaluate every one of the lineups that you have in the file that you are uploading. And then it is going to create a pool of those lineups to compete against each other and determine which lineups do the best, and then choose which lineup then you should essentially swap to for each of those lineups.
Yeah, and what I just did here, if people saw what I did while Steve was talking, is I took the file of lineups that I've built for the upcoming 2-game NBA slate. So what you would do is, let's say that you're playing on DraftKings and you're in between games and big news happens, right? Like LeBron James gets ruled out. You would download your CSV of contest from DraftKings, FanDuel Owners Box, wherever you're playing, and then you pop it right in here where it says choose file, which is what I just did. And then the next thing you could do is, if you want to use custom projections, like Steve said, you could put in your own custom projections here, or you could just use our projections, which are the default, and click continue. And now the next thing we're going to do here is generate a new contest pool. You could also create your own contest pool. And then you've got a few different options here in terms of the size of the pool to build out here, which same idea as when we were doing lineups in the contest generator and then the Sims tool by selecting the pool size. But then when we select here, generate new contest pool, what actually is happening in the late swap tool, Steve?
Yeah, so this contest pool is very similar to the contest pool that we're going against on the contest generator. So what we're doing is we're creating this contest pool so that we can see which of our swappable lineups performs the best against this pool. So once we create this pool, then it's going to go and play each of the lineups that we think are viable lineups to play against it, and see which one of them's come up with the best ROIs, essentially.
Yep. So that has just came in. And same deal if you guys wanted to change the ownerships in here. If you're looking at Chris Paul and you think, oh, Chris Paul is going to be more or less popular, you could change his ownership in here. And then the next thing you're going to do is create the swappable lineups. And this is very intuitive. If you guys wanted to, like, you don't have to put a lot of thought into it. You could just press the buttons and it's going to do a lot of it for you. But right here, like Steven mentioned, we're creating the potential swappable lineups. And one thing that you are going to run into with NBA late swap, especially on like a 2-game slate like NBA, like opening night for NBA, is you're going to have times where if almost all of your lineup spots are taken, you might not have a ton of even available lineups to choose from. And this is going to create all those different options and then ultimately tell you which ones are going to be the best in terms of the simulated ROI when these lineups are all playing against the field. So right now it is ranking the lineups, and you'll see the different things that it's doing on screen as we're going. But how exactly is it ranking the lineups as it's simulating in the NBA late swap tool?
Yeah, and I think this is really important, is it's doing it by ROI again. So we're not ranking exactly by like projection, for instance, or something like that. I think that's the one thing that people have been really hesitant to in the past, late swap as much as possible, is because they have this really robust process of building out lineups ahead of time, and then when they get to late swap, almost all the tools are pretty much just re-optimized based off of projection type thing. So you want to keep the integrity of your lineups together. But this one is we're basically going through. We're taking 10 lineups that we think are good quality lineups, and playing them against the contest that we created on step 2, and basically seeing which of those had the best ROI in those. And you can see that for each of the different lineups.
Yeah, and just for reference on what you guys are seeing on screen here is we've kind of set up a fake environment, which is assuming that this was the NBA 2-game slate, and we're in between the first and the second game. So that's how we set this up to best be able to make as an example of how the late swap tool would end up working. So the players here that you're seeing with the lock button, those are the players who are in the early game that have already locked. You can't change a player after they've already locked. It would be cool if you could. I'd be crushing every single NBA DFS contest if we could do that, but not at our disposal. Even with our new Sims tools, you got to play the guys that have already locked. So you'll see these players are being locked, and these lineups that are on the screen are the lineups that are already existing ones that we have in our DraftKings lineups. The easiest way to do this is if you guys just select the quick favorite pool, and you could just select favorite top ROI swap lineups, and that'll just automatically change all the lineups possible to the best possible projected ROI swaps. Is there anything else people should know about these settings, Steve?
Yep. So you could also, if you didn't want the top ROI ones, you could also just use the top projection ones as well. And if you wanted to go in and look at each individual one, like you could click on each individual lineup and see which of those lineups that it is choosing and which ones it's favoriting from that. So we can see in this case, lineup A actually did have the best lineup of 281%, which was the original lineup. So in this case, it didn't want to swap to anything else, but it is showing you what the other lineups, lineup C, D, E, F, etc., were, and you can see what their lineups are if you wanted to choose different ones other than the one that it's selected for you.
Yep. So if you wanted to, you could always unselect a lineup and you could favorite a different one instead. For this, though, it was our best overall projected lineup. So probably still one that I want to be selecting. But if you guys ever do want to, just make quick changes, unfavorite, a lot of times we're going to be up against the clock. That is the nature of NBA DFS. We do have really easy options where if you wanted to, you just click all the buttons. You could do everything with it just no inputs from yourself, just doing everything for itself in the tool. And then you just select favorite top ROI swap lineups. Then you could click export those lineups, and then you'd upload those directly into DraftKings. That's going to be the simplest way to do it. And I know we talked for a good amount here, but in reality, you guys could just press the buttons, and in a couple of minutes, you have all of your lineups optimally late swapped. Is there anything else here do you think people should know about the late swap tool, Steve? It is very easy to use.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Is it is super easy. Main thing you're just wanting to do is make sure that you are making sure that like projections are what they want to be. You can edit projections as necessary and do all those type of things. Just so I think this is going to really transform a lot of people, the way that they're playing this NBA season. And I think it's going to really help out our subscribers quite a bit, because an NBA late swap is a huge edge to be able to take advantage of. And the fact that we can do it in just a couple of clicks in a few minutes really is a huge edge for maybe not a lot of time.
Absolutely. And if something happens which this could happen from time to time, let's say you finish the process and then somebody else gets ruled out, or a different starting lineup changes right afterwards, you guys could just press restart and it'll take you right back to the start of the process, and you could build out new lineups. So this is everything you guys need to know about our new NBA Sims tools, from a contest generator to the Sims tool to the late swap tool. It's very easy to use. It's all included under one package. So if you sign up for NBA Sims package, you get everything. All of it is included under one package. And same goes for stuff like our player projections, ownership projections, all included in one bundle. So guys, thank you very much for watching. If you have any additional questions, you can hit me up on Twitter and we could definitely help you out there. If you want to sign up for our Sims package, there's a link included below in the description box. You guys could click on that and sign up for our NBA package. I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be a really good season. I think that our new tools are going to help everybody make a lot of money. So good luck this year, guys. And I hope to see you in the streets of the YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and also like the video. Good luck this year.